This episode of the podcast is dedicated by Aaron Friedman, Le'ila Nishmas' father, Alexander Friedman, Menashe Simcha, Ben Naftali Hertzka. If anyone would like to sponsor an episode or to support the podcast, please email me, svarimchatter@gmail.com. Also, there'll be a link in the show's notes, which is through the website, which goes through PayPal. Also, if anyone is able, much appreciated if you can rate and review the podcast, especially on Apple Podcasts, but also on Spotify. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Ephraim Chatter podcast. On this episode of the podcast, I'm going to be joined once again by Professor Ephraim Kanarfogel, who is the Billy Ivry University Professor of Jewish History, Literature, and Law at the Bernard Revel Graduate School at Yeshiva University. And on this episode, we will be discussing the Rosh. Rabbi Yechiel, famous for his Rosh in the back of every Gemara, as well as halachas, as well as some commentary, Tosafos, and many other things. So and Al-Torah and many other things. We'll get into that. I do want to mention, as with the previous episodes with Professor Kanarfogel, this episode is once again generously sponsored by Gluck Plumbing Service Division. Their number is 732-523-1836, extension 1, for anyone that has any plumbing needs in New Jersey. So thank you, Professor Kanarfogel, for joining me once again.
My pleasure once again, and thank the Glucks again. I have to go there someday and see how they do it.
Yeah. When we get you down to Lakewood,
I come to Lakewood. I've been in Lakewood. It's okay.
Okay, so let's start off the Rosh. I think I think last time either we did the Arzarua and the Mordechai all around the same. I think it was Arzarua. Before it was the Mordechai all around the same Tkufa, but the Rosh a little later, right? So let's talk about the Rosh.
A little bit. The Rosh. Let's start where we are. That's a good place to start. The Rosh, like the Mordechai, was among the outstanding. We can argue who's the most outstanding. He'd probably be it. Students of the Maharami Rutenberg. The Maharami Rutenberg, as much as he wrote Tshuvos and as much he was really the Posek Achron, he dies in 1293 Liminyonim in captivity. We'll come back to that with the Rosh. He has several outstanding Talmidim, some of whom write massive works. The Mordechai, which we discussed once, was one massive work. That Likut, the Or Zarua, it was actually a teacher of the Maharam, so it's a little bit earlier, and that's sort of the harbinger of the Mordechai. In some respects, they're different. The Rosh, though, is in terms of what he himself wrote, not just as a malakkate like the Mordechai did, not to take away from that, but as a creator of Sfarim, the Rosh produces what is really an unbelievable corpus of several major Sfarim, some other things, some questions. But I'd like to focus, if we can, as we go through, on his three major works, the Piskei HaRosh, which he did not, he put it all together, but as we'll see in a moment, he had a base on which he worked. Those are the Tosafos. We'll talk about that. The Piskei HaRosh, his psakim, which are to many of the Masechtas and Shas, and are just very complete works. And unlike the Mordechai, these are not likutim. He doesn't just collect from here, collect from there. He's running the entire show. He analyzed the Gemara. He quotes who he wants to quote. He quotes extensively from Ashkenazim, from Sfaradim. We'll talk about that as well. And his third work, and he really establishes what the halacha is from the sugya. We'll talk about that too. And his third major work, really are his Tshuvos, which were composed, it would seem, mainly when he got to Spain. We'll have to start with his whole biography in a second. But the Tshuvos have, and sometimes, and we'll talk about this too, there can be contradictions or seeming contradictions between some of these three works. Sometimes it just happens because he writes so massively, I think it's hard to coordinate, but the fact is they're not meant to be exactly coordinated. They're three different works. So somebody looking at the Tshuvos HaRosh and the Piskei HaRosh and the Tosafos HaRosh has to be aware these are three fundamentally different bodies of work. Same author. Obviously, he didn't change his mind radically between 1, 2, and 3, but you have to have a derech deal with it. And in fact, we'll get to this too, we have terrific Pirushim on the Piskei HaRosh, and one of their jobs is to try to stim or try to figure out not only contradictions within the vast corpus of the Rosh himself, of the Psakim, but the shtim between these other various bodies of literature. Right? And the Mordechai, not the shtim. Mordechai quotes a million things. The only question is sometimes he quotes the same thing in a different place a little differently, but you can't have tinus to the Mordechai. With the Rosh, he's putting it together. He's just giving it to you. The Rosh is the captain. He's the Kvaranit, they would say in Hebrew. He's the one running the entire operation. So it's interesting to see how and when he put these things together. So, with your permission, let's talk. And of course, you, Mr. Balha Podcast, have questions. You always do. You'll keep me on the right direction here. And I suspect people will ring in on this because everybody has their favorite Russian. And no matter what I do here, impossible to cover it all. So everybody listen carefully. I hope you'll enjoy. So first of all, in terms of the dates of the Rosh, some debate, more or less, Pachot Oter, he lives from approximately 1250 Leminyonim to somewhere in the 1320s. I joke with my students, my graduate students, every week the Rosh dies, so to speak, not to joke about it, in a different year in the 1320s, but somewhere in the 1320s, that's the end of his life. So he's not very old, but he's not a young man. Shivim Shana V'Gurosh Shmonu Shana. What's interesting, though, in the Rosh's case is he's not just sitting at home for those years learning. He's born in Germany. Again, some say Cologne, somewhere in the Rhineland-Main, somewhere in the Rhineland he's born. And his main Rebbe, and really, I wouldn't say his only Rebbe, but his major Rebbe by far is the Maharami Rutenberg. His father was also a Lamd, and we even have an interesting little sefer called Al Esek HaTorah. It's kind of a hashkafa, but Al Pi Lamdis. How do you learn? What are the values of learning? So he came from a mishpacha Toranit, we would say, a Lamdish family. There were others. His father was also connected, it seems, to the Hasidic Ashkenaz. His father has a whole piece on Baruch Hu Baruch Shmo, what that answer, right, when we say after a bracha, hefsek, not a hefsek, that has to do, he says, with the avirim, with the divine ethers, with certain manifestations, like the kavod of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, very complicated, but he knows these things, Rabbi Yechiel, the father. So the Rosh is not born into a vacuum. In any case, he learns with the Maharam for many years. There's some question. He quotes an awful lot of Tzarfatim, an awful lot of French. Certainly, Rabeinu Tam and Ri are probably his favorite Paleatosis to cite, but he knows a lot of French material. There are claims he went to France to study. The Maharam went to France to study. In fact, the Maharam, his Rebbe, learned mostly in northern France, with Rabbi Yechiel Paris, with Shmuel Falez, with very critical Paleatosis. We talked about that a little bit somewhere in the past. The Rosh, it seems, did not really go to France. He knows France because his Rebbe Maharam, Weistaltz, he knows France, he knows Germany. And so the Rosh spends approximately the first 50 years of his life in Germany. And then, we've talked about this before too, at a time when the persecutions, Jews of France, Jews of England are expelled in 1290. Jews of France are expelled the first time they're let back in, but there's a major expulsion in 1306. Germany, the Jews are never formally expelled, thanks very much. They are persecuted, and pogroms really start very significantly in the late 13th century. So, for example, 1298, armed letter pogrom, as it's known, Russia's Chaver, his fellow student of the Maharam, was killed in 1298, Al Kiddush Hashem. In the early 1300s, not surprisingly, the Rosh has to get out of Germany. In other words, Mahmat Tzukei Aitim, there are persecutions. He had moved around. He apparently spent some time in Erfurt, which is a little bit away. He apparently went with Maharam at some point before the Maharam was captured by Rudolf, by the king of Germany in 1286. The Maharam also was in Worms for a while. The Rosh was with him. So, but in the early 1300s, probably 1303 or 04, it doesn't matter, but right there, he's forced to leave. What's very sad about that is that his Rebbe Maharam, who died in 1293, they couldn't get him out. Pidyon Shvuyim, they couldn't do it. The Rosh was involved, by the way, in the political negotiations. Can't go into all of that, but the Rosh was not just a great Lamdin, he was also a great Manig. And he tried to get his Rebbe out. He didn't succeed. Interesting, if you look in the Piskei HaRosh, in the Sugya and Gittin Mem Hey about Pidyon Shvuyim, and again, especially about great Talmidei Chachamim, doesn't say it explicitly, but you can see, he says there's a machlokas 2 days in the Gemara there. Do we not pay so much exorbitantly, especially for a Gadol Batar, let's say, because we don't want to bankrupt the community, Dochak Hakihila, people will be broke, or do we not do it because then the Loiskecha people even more? The Rosh there says the Gemara doesn't clearly paskin. Point being, got to keep trying. So he kept trying. Again, is that autobiographical or not? The Rosh keeps trying, but he can't succeed. And so he leaves in 1303, 1304. The Maharam's body is only redeemed 14 years after he died, 1293 to 1307, by that famous Jew, Alexander Vimfin, who only asked that he be buried next to Maharam, and they're buried together at Yom Hazeh and Vurms. Have pictures of them at Seifes. The Rosh is already gone. He goes first, obviously, southward. He ends up in Provence, in southern France. And he goes down, however you get from Germany exactly. He goes from Germany through France to southern France, spends a little bit of time there. And by 1304-05, he's already in Spain, where he meets the Rashba, with whom he had a hitkat foot. They had a good relationship. The Rashba is very helpful to the Rosh. He tells everybody we have here a Godel Shabigdolim with us. But interestingly, the Rashba is in Barcelona, which is very northerly portion of Spain, what's known as Catalonia. He sends the Rosh to Toledo, Spain, not Toledo, Ohio, which is known as Castile, further south. And he says, that'll be your stellar. So again, and it worked out very well. And from that point on, from 1305, let's say, until the Rosh's Ptira, 20 years or so later, give or take, the Rosh spends the last 25 years or so of his life in Spain. And the fact is, most of his Svarim were certainly fine, virtually all of them were finalized in Spain. So he spent the first 2/3 of his life preparing to produce this tremendous corpus. That's what we have to know about the Rosh. And of course, in the middle of all of these tsaris, the Rosh is, again, nonetheless able to produce. People ask the question, well, what language did he speak with them in Spanish? The answer is he spoke Lumdus. And he really becomes the Rebbe of Toledo, the Rosh Hashiva of Toledo. And in fact, he uses all of these Svarim to teach his Bachrim there, but really to try to teach Yahadut Sfarad a lot about Yahadut Ashkenaz. And so, yes.
Now I want to jump in. So, what him leaving, the whole story with the dream, he leaves on Shabbos. What's the whole?
Where's that come from? These are later accounts. They're trying to explain, because again, the big problem historically here is how can he leave his Rebbe in jail? Tshuvos. So there are all kinds of hesberim. I don't know. Again, in Kabbalah, that'll take us off our topic a little bit, but that's, I think, why they were created, because it's not so simple to understand what happened here all of a sudden. I mean, again, who knows what to do when the persecutions start? It's similar to, God forbid, what happened, in Germany in the 20th century. Do you go this way? Do you go that way? That was the move that he made. By the way, he was not the only Talmud of the Maharam to go south. Look, the Mordechai Nebuch was killed. There was a student of the Maharam named Rabbi, who the Rashba also was aware of, and the Ritva too, who also went from Germany to Spain. So this was, Spain was a kind of an Ir Miklat, in the sense that the rulers of Spain, it took them a while before they figured out how to persecute Jews more efficiently, at least several decades, even more. And so certainly not before the Black Death. And so that was Machana Nishar Leflei Ta. So interestingly, although the Rosh clearly started his Tosafos, what we call Tosafos HaRosh, he clearly started them. He might have almost finished them before he even left Germany. Now, that's Daf Haben good to Tosafos, right? He took Tosafos Shans, which were an excellent collection of early Tosafos. We've talked about this before. He shortened them a little bit, because they were very full Tosafos, and he brought them with him to Spain. But very cleverly and appropriately, not only did he add into his Tosafos HaRosh things from his Rebbe the Maharam, or things from his Rebbe the Maharam's Rebbe, Rabbi Yechiel Miparis, a bit, not a ton, but certainly recognizable. The Chachmei Evro, who were the prior generation to Maharam, questioned whether he learned with them directly or not. Rabbi Simcha Mishpira, a great Baal HaTosfos in Germany, Rebbe of the Or Zarua, who's barely mentioned, if ever, in our printed Tosfos. Right? In the regular Shas Tosfos, they're not there. The Rosh puts them into his Tosfos. But not only does he add French and German Baal HaTosfos a little bit, he also adds the Ravid, who's not mentioned hardly at all. There's a whole vikuach. There are 3 references in our printed Tosfos. 2, 1, I could get it down to 1. The Rosh quotes the Ravid much more. Not many, many times, except in Moed Katan, where he quotes him about 60 times. Tells the Rosh to Moed Katan, Malay v'gadush meharavid. Why? because as Maharam writes in his Kuntras on Smachos, on Avelis, they didn't have so many Pirushim on Moed Cotton and these kind of Avelis de Kazachen in Ashkenaz. So Rosh is adding, it's a value added, right? He also, by the way, adds the Rambam. Very smart. If you're going to Spain, add the Rambam. And again, did he add that in Ashkenaz or already in Sfarad? The answer is yes. Lo yodim, but it's a very smart, yes, meaning Vesichnit, but it's very smart because now when he brings these Tosfos to Spain, they don't just see the Chachmei Tzarfat Ashkenaz, they see Chachmei Sfarad in there too. He even puts in from the Rashba into his Tosafos. It's like up to date. So clearly, some of this, at least the completion of it, I'll call it the final editing, was certainly done in Spain. And again, as some people have written, I think very nicely, his Megama, his main point in the Tosafos, as I say, was to bring Torah Ashkenaz, and let's say it Yeshivish, good to Tosafos to Spain. The Rosh says in 2 places in his Tshuvos, what Tosafos did they have in Spain before him? So the Ramban, by the way, in his Chidushim, the Ramban is older than the Rosh. He dies in 1270 in Eretz Yisrael. The Ramban also used Tosafos Shans. Those are good to Tosafos, but the Ramban then left out. Right? His students also use it. But what seemed to have been the main Tosafos, certainly in Toledo, maybe not in northern Spain where Ramban was, they were Tosafos Rabeinu Peretz, who's a little bit older than the Rosh, a little bit. And the Rosh, in 2 places in his Tshuvos, says he's not a big chassid of the Tosafos Rabeinu Peretz. He's very careful to say it, not because he thinks the Rebbe wasn't good. Rabeinu Peretz was a gadol b'Torah. The Talmidim were not as good. They didn't write it down as well. So the Rosh wants his students in Spain, again, whether that was the original intent or that became the more immediate intent, the Rosh makes his Tosafos, Torah Ashkenaz, make it accessible in Sfarad. But the result is, and Tosafos were not printed in the printed Tosafos. There's no Masechta that we have on Shas, standard Tosafos, where the Tosafos appear. The Piskei HaRosh, Bamberg had the first printing of Shas. He had Piskei HaRosh, but not Tosafos. But now that we have them to about 20 Masechtas, they're great because A, it's Tosafos Shans, so sometimes the Tosafos is clearer than the printed Tosafos. That's the way Tosafos Shans are. They're very often clearer. A couple of cases, Tosafos Rabbi Yisrael on another Talmud of the Re, early Tosafos. But he also adds in a broader perspective. Again, not hundreds of addenda or accretions, but 10 times Rabbi Yechiel, 10 times the Rash, whatever it is, it's very, very helpful. So that's the Tosafos. And again, he then uses it. He says, let's learn those Tosafos here in Spain. The Piskei HaRosh. But yes,
I want to jump in before we move on to Piskei.
Jump.
One asking the Tosafos. So first of all, you said you have about 20 Masechtas. Over the past decade or so or more at this point, Rabbi Shoshana, Machon Ofek printed on Psachim and on Chagiga, I think are the ones manuscripts from Russia. So are there more like that? Because those were never printed before.
So we also have Rabbi Shoshana's great stuff, a great work, and we'll call it stuff, and we have the Moser Rav Kook has reprinted many of the Tosafos with very good ha'aris, and the people who did it are very good. They know how to read Kisvei, they know how to read everything, they know how to learn. So we now have them. It seems there's a wonderful article by someone named Rabbi Yomin Richler, who used to work at the Institute of Hebrew Microfilm Manuscripts, where I, my home away from home, just there a couple of weeks ago. I'll be there again. It's Hashem. He did an article once on all the manuscripts of Tosafos, printed Tosafos, and Tosafos and Tosafos Rabeinu that we know about. Most of them have been published. Again, is there anything left? There might be something left, and there might be certain kisvei that could add, but we've basically got the Tosafos more or less as they are, and we have them in good editions also, so they're very, very helpful. By the way, the Rosh also wrote Pirushim. First of all, the Tosafos cover Masechtas in Moed, starting with Brachos, right, which was printed many years ago, part of the Bracha Mishaleshes, going from Brachos to Moed, many of the Masechtas in Moed, to Noshim. Again, there are older editions. Some of the newer editions haven't been caught up yet. To Nezikin, right? Bava Metzia, not Bava Kama so easily. Bava Basra version, and so on. Sanhedrin, things of that nature. But he also wrote Pirushim to many of the Masechtas in Zroim and Taros. His Rebbe also did that. And that, by the way, for me, is a sign of a French Baal HaTosfos. The Germans tended to stick with Kodshim. They didn't write as much either on Zroim, the Mishnayos, or on Taharos. The Baal HaTosfos in northern France, well, you'll tell me, but these people are Germans. Yeah, but they have a northern French tradition. So in that respect, they're French, and they cover all of that. And some of these Pirushim to some of, these are very difficult Masechtas. Again, those have been printed, not all critical, but printed. And we also have, the Rosh was very helpful. He has a Pirush to Nedarim, which we don't have a Pirush on. What we have on Nedarim, the Rashi is not exactly Rashi, right? The Tosafos has to, as the Rav said once, the Tosafos has to play Rashi, the Ran has to play Tosafos, everything gets moved up. The Rosh has a very good Pirush that's printed on the daf. I think Dr. Lamb, the Colonel of Rocha, in his Torah Lishma book, right, Reb Chaim Volozhin in Nefesh HaChaim, points to the Pirush HaRosh, Dach Mir in the Darm Sam Chabezim at Aleph, on Osim Lishma, and that's where he develops the definition of Torah Lishma, not Torah Al Manas Lasos, not Torah L'Shem Avas Hashem, but Torah L'Shem Torah. It's a Rosh. It's a Pirush HaRosh to Nedarim Samach Beis. You could look it up. It's there. Nedarim Nazir. Again, another Masechta. We need help. We need lots of help. So the Rosh was trying to fill in these gaps, and again, it's a very complete. Now, those are not exactly like his Tosafos. That's more his own Pirush, but again, certainly matim to his overall project. Yes.
So one more question about Teshuvos Rosh. Now you mentioned the Rosh, so I'll ask you about the Pirush Rosh before we get to the one more question on Teshuvos Rosh. So the Pirush Rosh, you mentioned those Masechtas are harder, but on a Rashi, etc. Did he write a Pirush? Do we know if he wrote in other Masechtas, or you think he wrote it here just because it was harder?
I suspect this is called, my famous rule, hitting the baseball or spring training, hitting them where they ain't. In other words, this was Dvarim Nechutzim. How much do you have on Zroim? So you have Maram, you have others. You have, by the way, the Rosh Mishans wrote on Zroim and Taros. So did the Rambam, but that's very understandable. Rambam believes in that, right? Again, the Rosh Mishans is the Avi Avos. He's the Degem. Again, Maram and Rosh were really the only two. There were a couple of others, others who took up this challenge. In any case, so I think that these are now. The other possibility, of course, is that since we need help on the Nedarim and Nazir, that's why they pulled out the Rosh. Maybe there are other Pirush HaRosh that are hiding. I'm not certain, that have not yet hit the stands. But I'm not sure. I suspect not so. Anyway, so lots of Tosafos, some Pirushim in very important places, and now we get to the Psukim, to the Piskei HaRosh, right?
One more question. So back to Teshuvos Rosh. Yes. I once had a Rebbe that told us, I recall, was like, you should do every Teshuvos Rosh because if nothing else, it's a chazara of Teshuvos, and you can see what you didn't happen Teshuvos and what's different, what's similar. So, but talk about why is that true? Why should someone learn Teshuvos Rosh? And let me think. Of course, besides for it being one of the about Teshuvos, what can someone take out versus you're doing whatever.
So I don't want to fabessa the words of the Rebbe, but the point is that the Teshuvos HaRosh, in some cases, I'll say this very gently, are clearer than the printed Tosafos. Why? Because the printed Tosafos can be, if it's Tosafos Tuch, let's say. So take Tosafos Tuch to Maseches Avodah Zarah. 4 layers. Tosafos Rabbi Elchanan ben Hari, Tosafos Rosh Mishans, Tosafos Shmuel Falez, put together by Rabeinu Peretz. Actually, it's Tosafos Rabeinu Peretz who puts it together. 4 layers. Not that it's not clear, but there's a lot going on there, and sometimes it's hard to go from step 1 to step 2. Right, that's why on Daf Yudal Beis of Avodah Zarah, you'll find a shita that asers certain business with certain Christian implements, and on Daf Nun Aleph, you'll find Tosafos in the same Masechta, which seem to be makel in some of those implements. Not a stira; they're being produced by different layers of Tosafos. You have to know that. The Rosh, there aren't 6 layers. It's his Tosafos, which is basically Tosafos Shans, which are amongst the clearest because they're the earliest. We've talked about this, the earlier in some of the other talks. Not that I expect everybody to remember. It's okay. You didn't have to listen to the other talks, right? The earlier it was, the clearer it was, the longer it was because it was one author. You didn't have to press them down together to fit it into the Tosafos, right? So that's why the Teshuvos HaRosh is so helpful, right? You're getting Tosafos, you're getting the Torah of Rosh Mishans, sometimes from Yehuda Seleon, and some comments that the Rosh adds on. But you don't have to wade through or push through 3 or 4 different collections. Not that there's anything wrong with that printed Tosafos, by the way. That's why in every yeshiva, they teach Tosafos. They don't teach everybody the Rashba first. If you can learn Tosafos, you can learn the Rashba, the Ritva, you can learn them all. Why? Because Tosafos has so many mechaber. So the Rosh, it's legal cheating. You're going to one mechaber, one work produced by the Rosh, which is very helpful. And that was maybe some of his taina to the so-called Tos Rabeinu Peretz, right? The Talmidim there didn't quite always put it together as, what Rabeinu Peretz used great stuff. Rabeinu Peretz is great, but how's it put together? Not clear, but that might be what your Rebbe had in mind. That's certainly why it's worthwhile to study Tos HaRosh, because you get a very clear picture in many cases, not everywhere, but in many, many cases. Right. You look at the footnotes that the Rabbi Shoshana, that the Ofek edition has on Tos HaRosh there, you can make from Tos HaRosh a major opus. He's got because again, it's so clear that you can then put in, what does he say? What does he say? So the footnotes are a complete United Nations, so to speak, but the Makaros themselves are crystal clear. Good. Okay. So I recommend Tos HaRosh. I recommend. Thank you very much. It's Kedai Lanu to know Tos HaRosh also. And again, by the way, not all of these things were available in earlier generations. I think I mentioned once to you, as maybe one of the listeners will know, somewhere, Rav Moshe Feinstein in the Tshuvos, the Rav Moshe, says he ends up with a machlokes between the Tosafos and the Tos HaRosh on a particular masechta. I don't remember where I can't remember for the life. I rack my brains out. Maybe somebody will email me. Anyway, you have good correspondence here. And Rav Moshe has to figure out, do I paskin like the Tosafos, like the Tos HaRosh? Zoktir, and this is why Rav Moshe, the Tos HaRosh is inside. It's like the Mishnah. I'm sorry, the printed Tosafos, the top, let me get this straight. The Tosafos on the Masechta is like the Mishnah. The Tos HaRosh is like the Brisa. It's outside. In other words, it's a separate sefer. We pass like the Mishnah against the Brisa. Very clever. Again, but that's what a posek does with it. In other words, in terms of lumdus, right, you can use the Tos HaRosh to clarify, to help you understand what's happening in the Olam HaTosafos. Good. Okay, so let's move a little bit to the Piskei HaRosh. We'll try. That's the second of his major works. And again, this too was likely begun when he was still in Germany, the Rosh, but here already he certainly added and completed, maybe wrote most of it. Again, we're not sure. This was done very much in Spain, mainly because the integration here of Spanish Makoros, of Sephardic Makoros, is even more noticeable. Not that he quotes so many hundreds, but for example, the Rosh is the first Ashkenazic Jew that I know of. Well, I'm not the first. He's one of the two earliest Ashkenazic Jews to quote the Chidush Ramban. Right? The Ramban quotes a lot of Tosafos. He had Tosafos too. But who's the first Ashkenazi to quote the Ramban, the Chidush Ramban? So that I goes, my money who, by the way, was another student of the Maharami Rittenberg, who made footnotes on the Rambam, not as massive as the Rosh of the Mordechai, but there were Tshuvos also, my money was not a little book either. The Hagos, my money I think I counted, has about 20 citations of the Chidush Ramban and his Hagos in his footnotes to the Rambam. Good idea. The Rosh has, in his Piskei HaRosh, I try to count these things, but sometimes he mentioned more than once. It's certainly more than 60. It might even be closer to it. It's a lot. Now, if you're writing on many Masechtas of Shas, the Rosh, the Piskei HaRosh, certainly all the practical Masechtas, right? All the Masechtas in Moed Noshim Nezikin. So 50, even 100 references is not so massive, but it gives you an idea. And he's really the first. There's a book by someone named H.J. Zimmels, written around 1958, a very good English book, Ashkenazim and Sfardim, differences in the Pirushim. And even though it's an old book, and a lot of it we know differently now from based on other sources, some of the ways he compares Minhagei Ashkenaz to Sfarad are interesting. But he says the Rosh is the first one who really brought Ashkenaz and Sfarad into contact. Zelo b'diuk nachon. The Ramban is really the first Sephardi who cites French Tosafos, right? A little bit from Germans, not as much, Sefer Yereim, whatever. So really the Ramban, the Rashba, before the Rosh do that. But what he's absolutely right about, even though he doesn't say it this way, the Rosh is the first one, right? He's a German quoting Sfarad. He's putting Sfarad into conversation with Germany, with Ashkenaz, and that's really very unique. So that's a really very unique shiluv that the Rosh is able to pull off. Now, here's an important point also to keep in mind with regard to the Piskei HaRosh. The Piskei HaRosh, and this is clearly the game plan that he got from his Rebbe Maharam. I think we talked about this a little bit in the Mordechai too. The Rosh, like the Mordechai, was arranged according to the Seder HaRif, the order of the Rif. And it's so, where the Rif has Simon, if you look in the back of the printed Gemara, it's Elef, Simon, Elef, Samaches, Simon this, Simon that. The Rosh is really arranged according to the Rif, which is why if the Rif talks about something, the Rosh probably will. If the Rif leaves it out in a particular place, the Rosh probably won't pick it up either. Again, the Maharam had an idea that by joining Torah Ashkenaz with the Rambam and the Rif, the Gedolei Torah Sfarad, we talked about this once, it will help preserve the Ashkenazic material. Nebuch, he's in jail, he's leaving town, he's being killed like Kiddush Hashem. Hook it up, attach it to Rif and Rambam, the Hayam Achanan Ishar Lefleita, that will help preserve the Ashkenazic Torah. So even though the Rosh is going around, but he's going in tandem with the Rif, he means to cover all of Shas and to, in fact, get people out of just learning the Rif. He wants to get people to go back to learning Shas, full Shas. And that is expressed famously in the introduction of one of his son, Rabbi Yehuda's students. We'll talk about the sons at the very end to say a word. Rabbi Yehuda ben HaRosh had a student who wrote a sefer called Tzedel HaDerech. They call it an encyclopedia. It's a michlol. It's a very interesting book. It's got halacha, it's got hashkafa, it's got everything from how do you raise a little baby, swaddling, nursing practices. You can't imagine what's in there. The author, Menachem Ibn Zerach, has a Hakdama and basically says the Rosh saved Talmudic studies in Spain. How so? It says because many Sfaradim would learn the Rif, that became the Shas Cotton, right? What if to schlep around the whole Gemara? Not schlepping. We'll focus our learning on the Rif. We don't have to learn, the parts of Shas that the Rif didn't comment on. Okay, those are harder. 3 Siddharim, we'll do the best we can. And the same thing sort of happened with the Rambam. In fact, the Rambam in some ways competed with the Rif. Who's going to take over the data of Torah Shabbal Peh? But he says, and many people in Spain and in Provence commented Dafka on the Rif, Dafka on the Rambam. He says the Rosh went back and he wrote Tosafos, and he says explicitly that Tosafos Rash Mishans with some accretions from his rebbeim, his Rebbe's rebbeim, right? Between that and even his Psakim, the Rosh brought back full Talmudic study, or made sure that full Talmudic study would be the case. Again, even though he's arrayed, so to speak, in some tandem with the Rif. So that's one of the many paradoxes in the Rosh. He's supposed to be working along the Rif, but in the meantime, he's really opening up Shas back to the full way that Rashi and the Bali Hatos intended it. That's in the Hakdama to Tzedel HaDerech. That page in the Tzedel HaDerech is worth reading. It give you all basic Rishonim on one page in the Hakdama. I can tell you exactly where it is. It's in the Hakdama. It's on page Dalet in the one edition, but you can find it. It's not hard to find. By the way, interestingly, there were later Kisveyad. They found some Kisveyad which have the Piskei HaRosh as the subject, and somebody put, just like you have Rashi on the Rif, right? Which is not Rashi. It's pieces from Rashi added to pieces from Rabbi Yonasan of Lunel. But just to help to learn the Rif, right? Because people are learning it as the Gemara. So, the Rashi on the Rif is a joke because the Rashi's earlier. No, but it's meant to help to learn the Rif. There were some Kisveyad that did that with the Piskei HaRosh, that some wanted to make the Rosh a kind of a Shas cotton, but he didn't want that. That's not what he wanted. He wanted to bring you full treatment of Gemara. You should learn Gemara, and you should use his psakim. Again, he explains the Gemara, but his main goal is to paskin halach, and I would say even more strongly, to show you how the Gemara paskins. And that's a very important point. While the Rosh brings a lot of data, his main goal is to show you how to paskin. And the Rosh thinks that you paskin based on the daya, based on the Perush, or based on the Rishon, or based on the school that explains the Gemara best. Which is why, for all that he cites, the Rosh was related perhaps directly to the Ra'avon in Germany, one of the early Bali Atoses. Doesn't cite him so much, cites him a little bit, The Ravia, not so much. He cites Rabeinu Tam and the Ri a lot. He again cites a number of Chachmei Sfarad, the Ramban a lot, the Ramah, Rameir Halevi, again, the first German really to cite the Ramah, who was a Sfaradi from Toledo, 20 times, 30 times, enough. He cites the Rebbe Gash a little bit. Nobody had cited him really except for the Smog in a couple of places. So he brings all these things together. But the fact is, what he really wants to do is learn the Gemara for halacha. What he's really interested in doing is showing you how the sugya paskins. So, for example, Maran Erevin tells you when Tana A argues, who do we paskin like when Reb Meir argues with Reb Yehuda, the Tanoim. But that's not the way the Gemara usually paskins. It's usually more complicated. Which opinion in the Gemara does the Gemara question, right? The opinion which the Gemara blitzes but allows to stand, that's the halacha. That's why they spend so much time. The Rosh will give you the mechanics. He has lots of rules of how to paskin halacha and to show you how the halacha comes out of the Gemara. And even though the Rosh quotes a lot of people, there is, by the way, I'll call it biography. There is a Hebrew sefer published by Moshe Rav Kook a number of years ago, which is the best one-volume history of the Rosh that we have. It's by someone named Aleph Chet Freiman, published originally in German in the 1920s. Thankfully, Moshe Rav Kook had it in two separate articles. Moshe Rav Kook had it translated. Again, it's an older study, so there are things we know now that are a little different, but it's a very good way of knowing what's going on. He points out there for all the Rosh sites, some from Germany, some more from France, some from Spain, he's the first to cite Maritz Gias, who preceded the Rif as the Rosh Yeshiva in Lucina. No Ashkenazi ever cited him. For all the Gevaldig and Makars that he cites the Rosh, he agrees with no one unless their Pirush is the best Pirush in the Gemara, right? May the best Pirush win, which is a very Ashkenazic, France and Germany, a very Ashkenazic tchuna, right? Precedent to him doesn't mean much. In one place in his Tshuvos, he says, don't chanfid the Geonim. In other words, meaning the Geonim don't get credit just because they came before the Rishonim. They have to have the right shita, right? And even though he compares the Rambam to the Balei HaTosafos, it doesn't matter what your reputation is. It doesn't matter how many home runs you hit, so to speak, in learning. It matters how you learn the Gemara. And if I may, I hope I'm not overwhelming everyone, but if I may, I want to cite one Rosh which really makes that point come home. In the Piskei HaRosh, maybe people know this, but in the Piskei, everybody has their own favorite Roshes, right? They rush to the Rosh. I'm sure that the listeners will have their own favorite Roshes. There's a piece in Perek Daled of Sanhedrin, Siv Vav, where the Gemara talks about Torah b'Dvar Mishnah, Torah b'Shikol Hadas, right? If a Dayan makes a mistake, on a Dvar Mishnah means on an explicit source, right? He blows it. He forgets that source. He doesn't remember it. He doesn't use it, whatever it is. One thing happens. The din is taken back. What happens if he's Toeh, not b'Dvar Mishnah, but b'Shikol Hadas, in the application of the Makoros? So that's a different status to the din, right? In those basic errors of sourcing, as opposed to application errors, right? One is worse, one is better. They may switch around. The Rosh here, the Gemara talks about it in the first parak Sanhedrin, the Gemara talks about it again in the fourth parak. The Rosh here cites 4 opinions on what constitutes Dvar Mishnah. The issue in the Gemara itself is, right, does Dvar Mishnah just mean Tanoim? So the Amoraim ask, what about us? I'm going to say it in honor of Purim. We're not chopped liver. If somebody makes a mistake in the Beferish Amoraim, it's not a Mishnah, but isn't that Tovah Dvar Mishnah? It's a data mistake. It's a Nichsei Tzon Barzel mistake. You missed what the Amorah said, right? And the Gemara says in Achinami, the Lashon of the Gemara is better than mine. Am I like a reed on the sea? That's the chopped liver. Am I like some kind of a bush? I'm not like a plant. No, the Amoraim also are sources of Talmudic data. So then the question becomes, does the data end with the Gemara? What about the Geonim, right? So the first opinion that the Rosh quotes, he quotes a Baal HaMor. And by the way, the Rosh also quotes, as I mentioned before, he quotes Prophet Salmakoros, the Baal HaMor, the Ravid. He's a very equal opportunity citer. He quotes the Baal HaMor, who quotes a Chacham Gadol Mechachmei Doreinu. So somebody else from our day who says the Geonim who come after the Shas, they're considered Torah b'Dvar Mishnah. If you miss a Geonic Tshuva, that's it. You've missed critical data. That's the way the Baal HaMor quotes. Somebody actually tried to argue based on a Geniza text that's the Rimi Gash. The Rimi Gash is a famous tshuva, right? The Rimi Gash was the Rebbe of the Rambam's father. That nowadays, he died in 1141. Nowadays, we can't paskin based on our reasoning on it. We have to really use the Geonim to get us into the right area of halacha. And if you miss the Geonim, it's a famous tshuva Kuf Yudal and the tshuva's Rimi Gash. That may be this Chacham who the Baal HaMor is quoting, that the Geonim are The Geonim are the end of Torah B'Dvar Mishnah. After that, you must do the Geonim. The Baal Hamor himself says, I don't like it, right? Rather, so if the fellow doesn't know it, he didn't know that Tshuvos HaGeonim, Mela. But if he then hears about it and he can answer back, so he's explained the Geonim. In other words, what the Baal Hamor is trying to say, which everybody knows the Baal Hamor would say that's just the way he is. Whoever has the most convincing Pirush of the Gemara, that wins, right? You don't just give status to prior generations, even the Geonim. And then he quotes a third opinion. So that's opinion 1, Geonim, nothing else. Opinion 2, the Baal Hamor, no, you can dinzach if you have the right approach, the right answer. The Ravid then is quoted, and the Ravid says, in theory, that's true. You could argue with the Geonim, except he says the Ravid, Karvani Lomar, you can only argue with the Geonim if you have a kushya for semes. If you have what we used to call in yeshiva a bomb kasha, a bomba. If you have a kasha against the Geonim that's so great, you can argue, but nobody has that. So people ask, wait a second, the Ravid disagrees with the Geonim. So I think the answer is, if you're doing the Ravid wrote from the bottom up, he wrote a whole corpus on half a shas and many other things that we don't even have, right? Then you can argue with Geonim, but this is to Dayanim. If you're a regular Dayan, it's going to be very hard to argue with the Geonim. So again, it sort of shifts back. And finally, the Rosh gives his own opinion. And the Rosh's own opinion is like the Baal Hamor, only even stronger. He says it all depends who has the best Pirush in the Sefer, in the Shas. And he even says, how do you know? He says, yes, 10 Talmidei Chachamim. In other words, if your Pirush is accepted, then your Pirush outdoes, it doesn't outdo the Gemara. You can never jump the line and outdo and go in and attack the Gemara, God forbid. But you can do everything in post-Talmudic period. So that's the Rosh taking a very Ashkenazic view here. Anyway, and that really, to my mind, is symbolic of the Rosh's approach to precedent, right? Not like Chachmei Sfarad. I mean, again, the Rambam, of course, is a great exception. Not that some of them don't argue either, but there's a whole different issue. It's the Geonim, it's other things. For the Rosh, there is no such Indian. And in fact, we'll find any number of places the Rosh supposedly writes around the Rif. The Rosh attacks the Rif plenty. There's a Gemara in Gittin. There's a Gemara in Gittin here. Daf Mem Dalid, the Gemara is discussing there Knossos. Can you collect Knossos Bizban Hazeh? So the Rav Alphas, the Rif, said that we can't collect Knossos because you need Bnei Eretz Yisrael. So Gemara in Bava Kama, you need Smuchim. You need people who are ordained with the old Smicha. We can't collect Knossos. We can do Dini Mamanis, where it's, here's the damage, here's the amount. But if it's a Knas, if it's a Nezek, that's a Knas, you can't collect that. Chutzlar, it's low. So the Rosh says, Tamati al divrei hagaon. I don't understand the Rif. The Manyan zel Knossos. Why should you connect Knossos? Because the Knossos in Bavel or any place else, right? If they're Knossos which the Torah prescribed in a Chanami, a judge himself, post Eretz Yisrael, may not be able to impose fines, right? But what happens if it's a Knas, right? I'm sorry, the other way around. That's about knossos, which the Torah prescribed. Aval in Chachamim tiknu knossos laso siag la Torah, right? Chachamim have to have rules, right? Things go wrong. They have to, make people pay for certain things or make certain societal rules. Lama lo yigvo some bebavel. That, by the way, is also the opinion of French Balei HaTosfos. But again, the Rif has no problem arguing. The Rosh has no problem arguing even with the Rif on whose work he's going. So to make a long story short, Mitzad Echad, the Rosh, here's the takeaway. The Rosh in his psukim tries to be very inclusive. He's got a lot of French Tosafos material, Ri and Rabeinu Tam in particular. Those are his favorites, it seems, and he's got other indications of that. He's got some material from the German Balei HaTosfos. He's got material from Gedolei Chachmei Provence, the Ravid, the Baal Hamor, and others. He's got material even from 13th century Chachmei Sfarad for the first time in Ashkenazi, by birth and by training. 50 years old when he left. Ramban, Rashba, I mentioned Maritz Gias even earlier, you name it. Again, not Ramah, not always hundreds of times, but significantly. But at the end of the day, he calls the psak based on who learns the Gemara best. And that, by the way, is a very Ashkenazi way of doing things. It's not unrelated to Hasidei Ashkenaz. So what you're hearing from me, I hope it's clear, is that Piskei HaRosh is an extremely variegated work, and there's more to say, but I'll leave everybody alone now. I do want to say, though, there's and by the way, the Rosh's son, Rabbi Yaakov, who's the author of the Arba'at Turim, the so-called Tur Shulchan Aruch, right? That's a little bit of a misnomer, but it's what became the 4 halakim of Shulchan Aruch that the Baal HaTurim invented, that he created, right? How to divide up halacha. The Baal HaTurim does the same, even more so. He quotes all kinds of Ashkenazim, he quotes all kinds of Saradim, maybe even more than his father. I should add, by the way, and then you can direct me, Mr. Podcast, one of the great it's a kind of an interesting commentary. I would call it more of a hashlama to the Rosh, is what's called the Hagahos Ashri, the footnotes on the Rosh, the comments on the Rosh. What is he commenting? So this is someone named Yisrael Krems, right, who lived in the late 14th, early 15th century, right, late 13th, early 14th. And what does he do? So he's all over the place. What does he do, though? And I don't mean all over the place in terms of his effectiveness. He's very clear. He brings German Baliatosis. He brings the Or Zarua a lot. He brings the Ravia. He brings somebody a lot of times called the Maharich, Mizah HaMaharich, right? People learn Hagos Ashri, or the Heilige Maharich. Maharich is very important. It's Reb Chizkiah or Reb Yechizkiah. That's why Maharich, mi Magdeburg. Chizkiah mi Magdeburg was a contemporary of the Or Zarua. He has psukim based on the Tosafos. I actually have a student working on this stuff now. They're working on an Eretz Yisrael. Very interesting stuff. So this is what Yisrael Krems basically is adding some more German material into the Rosh, because the Rosh, again, tends to favor some of the French Baliatosis. When we did the Mordechai, if you recall, Mordechai quotes more Germans than Frenchmen. The Rosh sort of reverses. So these are the issues of the day. But interestingly, there's one Chacham Sfaradi who's an exact contemporary of the Rosh, and that might be part of the answer. He's an exact contemporary of the Rosh, who the Rosh doesn't quote, and the Tur doesn't quote, even though the Rosh and this Chacham Sfaradi have a lot in common in terms of how they learn, because this Chacham Sfaradi, like the Rashba, like the Ramban, had Baliatosis material. French, they also had Tosafos Shas. They liked it, right? Who's that? The Ritva. The Ritva is almost an exact contemporary of the Rosh, and the Rosh is in Spain. He certainly should have access to it. Not a word. So maybe, again, contemporaries, it's hard to cite. I'm sure there was no problem between them. Doesn't cite him at all, despite some of the commonalities. In fact, I once saw the Ritva to Yavamis that was done by the Nevardika, Rav
Yafin.
Yafin Olav Hashalom. Yeah, terrific. 3 lines Ritva, 400 pieces of Torah from the Rosh Shiva. Fantastic. It's 2 big krachim avim. Most of the Rav Kook did it, so they have the names of which Chachamim are mentioned in volume 2, not in volume 1. So I once looked at the volume 2, and I'm looking at the names, and I said, wait a minute. He quotes a Rosh. It says Rosh on this page. So I rushed to that page. It's not a typo. There is a Rabosha there. There is a Rosh there. It's not Rabosha ben Yechiel, our Rosh. It's Rabosha of Lunel in the late 12th century in Provence. It's the exception which doesn't even disturb the rule. So this is an interesting Tofazo Americ Darsheni. Not quite clear. I have theories, and by the way, the Tur doesn't quote the Chidush Ritva either. And the Tur is complete. The Tur dies somewhere around 1350. So that's just an interesting curiosity, which I don't know if people have ever noticed. Let me just say, while I'm here, also we have 2 other really excellent Pirushim on the Rosh. The Rosh was Zoche, the 2 great Gewaltige Lamdonim who knew Kol Tarakula and Kol Torah Tarosh Lakula. And I must say that our Balha podcasts, we sometimes have a little pregame, not rehearsal, but pregame questions. One of the questions he sent was, how come people haven't really done the Kisvayat of the Rosh? I think one of the good problems of the Rosh is, number one, the Rosh that we have reads pretty clearly. It was printed again. Bomberg printed it in the first printing of the Shas already, a Piskei HaRosh, not every Masechta, but the print is pretty good compared to the Mordechai, where you have parentheses and brackets, and they add this and subtract that, and you have different versions of the Mordechai. The Rosh is a one-man show, right? The other reason I think the Kisvei Yad may not have been worked on so much is because you have these two Gewaldige Pirushim, which pretty much find almost every stira in the Rosh or every perceived stira. They deal with some of these manuscript problems, they deal with some of the problems. Which text did he have? I'll mention them. The other reason, by the way, just to satisfy our host, is I haven't looked at it extensively, but there aren't that many Kisvei Yad of the Piskei HaRosh, and they seem to be pretty much in sync. There are some that are better than others. There's a British Museum Ktav Yad on, I think, Moed, and on certain one of his Pirushim is in there that's supposed to be particularly good. I actually, thanks to the podcast, I actually found, I haven't seen it yet. Apparently, the Yeshiva University Library has it. I've just not seen it. There's a version, there's an edition, it's the only one I've seen that I know of, Piskei HaRosh to Tshuvos, done by somebody in Eretz Yisrael, al pi Kitvei Yad, a kind of a critical edition, but I haven't seen it, so I have to go find it to report on A, what the Kitvei Yad revealed to him, and B, how good Kamenovich the fellow is. I don't know his Chaim Kamenovich, done in 1988, but I've never seen it. Who are the two major commentaries on Piskei HaRosh? So first of all, these are names that everybody who learns the Rosh will know. The later one, but that's the name you'll know even better, I'll go backwards here, the Korban Nesanel. Miza HaKorban Nesanel, Rabbi Nesanel Weil, who dies around 1750. So he's an Achron, right? And he did the Korban Nesanel to Noshim and Moed, right? And he's got Girsos in the Rosh. He's got the sources of the Rosh, where's the Rosh getting this from, and that's printed in our printed Shasen right there. The other thing that you have is Rabbi Yom Tov Lipman Heller, Tosafos Yom Tov on the Mishnah, right, who dies in 1625 or so, around there, so he's a century and a half earlier. He's the author of a couple of Svarim on the Rosh, the different parts, the Lechem Chamudos, the Ma'adonei HaMelech. How do you get those titles? Because of the pasuk, right? Me'asher shmeina lachmo, v'hu yitein ma'adanei melech. So what should I call my parish on the Rosh? Rabasha A and Rabasha B, right? The lechem and the basa, right? And the third one, which may be more famous in yeshivas, Kapula Charifta. This is all by Rabbi Yom Tov Lipman Heller. And again, he knows the Rosh upside, backwards, forwards. They ask stiris, they ask kashis. I think it's the what do you call it? Yes, the Korban Nesanel there on that Gemara in Gittin that I mentioned with Knossos. He says there in his notes, nobody knows that the Rosh is attacking the Rif this way. And again, it's in the Mordechai. It's quoted from French by Tosafos elsewhere. He's putting here a new shita. How come no post can pick it up? Because they'll tell you have to know, because in the Rosh there's so many thousands of details. You have to know. It's like learning Shas. You have to know everything. Let me switch gears a little bit. First of all, what accounts for the popularity of the Rosh? So again, the text is clean, the printed text, not that there are no kashas, but the text is clean. It doesn't seem to have too many kishkushim in terms of copying and so on, relatively speaking to other things. You've got these great mefarshim on the Rosh, so that certainly helps. But there's another thing that made the Rosh very, very popular, or even later on, and that is when Rabbi Yosef Karo in the Beis Yosef gives his pecking order. Again, I mean that the Altar HaKodesh, his order of how he's going to paskin, right? So he has the Aleph Alfei Havdalas. I like to call them the lines, not lines in hockey, lines of poskim. Who's my first line? Where do I look first? Where do I look next? Right? What do I look after that? He's got a few lines of who he'll start with, who will go to. So as everyone knows, who are his top three? Who's his first line? The Rif, the Rosh, the Rif, the Rambam, and the Rosh. I'm going to what I gave it away, right? And some say it's the Rambam and then everybody else. But in any case, the Rif, the Ram, and the Rosh. Meaning, what would you call that? 2.5 Svardim, right? So for the Beis Yosef, it works very well. But it's interesting, the Rosh who lo kazeh Sfaradi tahor, right? The Rosh is an Ashkenazic Jew, which the Mechaber loved. The Mechaber quotes Chachmei Ashkenaz, doesn't need my haskama, all the time. Tshuvos Hadeshen is his best friend, even when he disagrees with him. And Tshuvos Hadeshen is a late Rishon of Ashkenaz. Loves the Tshuvos Hadeshen, loves the Balei HaTosas, they're his second line. But the Rosh made it into the first line of the Mechaber. From that point on, when the Rosh makes it into the first line of the Mechaber, it's very clear to any posek, certainly, if not any Lamdin, Medaf learn in the Rosh. Never mind again that it's printed in the Shasen number 1, right? The Mordechai is in the back. The Rosh is right in the front. It's hard to miss. So that's the Piskei HaRosh. Okay. Ask me questions, Mr. Podcaster, and we'll talk about the Tshuvos.
Yeah, I have a couple things to point out. So first of all, so on the manuscripts, I mean, not much to say. I understand what you're saying, but I will point out, like, I know for myself, having looked at things, there are differences in the Tshuvos Venezia and the Venice Bomberg and the newer ones and Kisveyad, and you can find differences. And a lot of times, like you're saying, because of Teis Yom Tov for the Korban Nesanel clarify things, it's just you can lose that, and there could be chalukim in the pshat, and just no one's really done it. Even the Gemara says Vahadar has not. There's been no work that's even uniform on the different editions. I just wanted to point that out. Now, something else is interesting. So you talk about the Teis Yom Tov especially. Did that have to do with his Rebbe? We didn't mention the Maral here. The Maral, I think, in the Sivas Elam, the Sivatera talks about how he talks about everyone learning Tosafos, and he wants to put Rosh on the page, right? Doesn't he want? I think he wants to put Rosh on the page of the Gemara. He has this chashivas for the Rosh. The Maral.
Yeah.
No. So I don't know if that's where it comes from.
Certainly Acholiot. Certainly Acholiot. In other words, the Rosh had, again, listen. Everybody loved the Sefer Mordechai because it gave data, but it's not the Mordechai. I mean, they love the Mordechai, but it's his data. With the Rosh, everybody realized what the Rosh did, what the Rosh created himself. It's clear, that he was very outstanding, extremely outstanding, and so he had a lot of very important supporters, including Mara. Could be, in other words, the Rosh is just so amazing. Again, you think of the Rashba, who's his contemporary, and the Rashba also wrote a ton. Wrote Chidushim on Al-Shas, different Maduros. He wrote Tshuvos. The Rosh, by the way, as we'll talk about, wrote 1,000 Tshuvos, and we actually somebody recently found more additional collections. But these are people who are just so great. They have such a command of everything, and unlike the Tosafos, where you can't always tell who said what. Right, exactly. Not that it was said by some, God forbid, somebody who didn't belong. It was clearly from the base marriage. With the Rosh, you can tell this one person said it all. So I think that's a good way of thinking. Yes, I agree with that.
Now, another thing is you mentioned those two commentaries, but I want to mention, first of all, the Tfar Shmuel of Aaron Shmuel Kaitanover we have on Rosh.
Correct.
I mentioned him. He's the Brechas Zevach and Kachim. He's also the father of the Kavayasher. People are familiar with.
Correct.
There's him, and then also I don't know if you mentioned the Kitzur Piskei HaRosh from the Torah himself. We have.
So again, right. I left out, not purposely, but I left out Reb Shmuel Kaitanover for sure. The Reb Shmuel Kaitanover, I think also they quote in the Nachla Shiva at one point, somebody gave him a shtickle Torah and he got a little bit aggravated. He said, you should, he quotes a machloka Shach and Taz with whom he learned, in the base Medrash at the same time. He says, you should sell your Shulchan Aruch and go with the golden table, the tour, and you should go work with the tour. So Shul Kaitanover Bichlal, the Rosh, the tour, and by the way, that's the Piskei HaRosh. The tour, I didn't want to, that's another podcast. The tour, I don't know, have to have help here. The tour helped make his father's work very popular also, because obviously the tour doesn't move without quoting Adonai HaRosh every 5 lines, number one. Number two, the tour is the one, L'chora, some discussion, who authored the so-called Piskei HaRosh. Although, interestingly, there are contradictions that way too. And the tour also, according to some, is the one who put together the Rosh's Tshuvos. So the Rosh and the tour are not the same person; they are separable, but that also leads very much to the chashivas to the Rosh. So certainly that it's a good addition. I didn't mean to leave him out for negative reasons. Just see feel, but so that certainly is what happens. The Rosh's work, the tour is his best spokesman, right? So if anybody didn't know the Rosh before the tour wrote his Arba Turim, they surely knew it afterwards, right? Va'orech. So the Tshuvos, in fact, apparently, as I say, Professor Tashma, others thought that the tour played a major role in putting them together. Again, especially because not that there are no Tshuvos from Ashkenaz or to Ashkenaz, but from what we can tell, not all of them are identified. Many are not. They seem to be addressed to Spain, and so we get interesting discussions in the Tshuvos, not only the Tshuvos themselves, but we get interesting discussions of what they did in Ashkenaz, what they did in Sfarad, and what the Rosh thinks about all of that. And obviously, in certain cases, the Rosh was happier, if I can say that, with what they did in Ashkenaz. But he does accept, he's there and he's the Morad Asra in Toledo. He does accept a lot of the practices clearly in Sfarad as well. Interestingly, one of the ones that he couldn't quite get his head around, apparently they were not Nizhar on Shmitz Ksofim, right? The whole Prusbul thing was not done in Sfarad. The Rosh basically says, we always did it. Why aren't they doing it? The Rosh also had concerns with quote unquote capital punishment, which the Rabbanei Sfarad, because they were, so they were also the king, the royalty recognized them. They were responsible for, they would rather them punish the Jews than to have the non-Jews do it. The Rosh also was very concerned about that. The Rosh, apparently they were kofeg gittin in Sfarad, not infrequently. The Rosh was not so happy about that. So you get some pushback. There's a Rosh in a number of cases in Hilchos Shabbos, the Rosh talking about sweeping, what you can sweep on Shabbos, what kind of a broom, what kind of dirt, how deep, whatever, what kind of formation of what you're sweeping. And the Rosh says, here in Ashkenaz, we only did this. Here in Spain, they do much more, and they base it on the Rif. I think I disagree, but the Rif was their Rebbe, in other words, so the Rosh has to, it's not so simple. But Big Gadol, I would say, who is that there? He also has a famous tshuva where he talks about the kashrus of Ophos, the Kabbalos on Ophos, right? The turkey question, sort of, not exactly. And he says the Masoros and Ashkenaz go back to Bayesheni. He looks at that. But again, bottom line, he did use these tshuvas to reach the people in Sfarad. Very interesting. There is a thesis that was written, a doctoral thesis written by Professor Urbach's granddaughter, Tilali Tzur. Very nice thesis. She wrote it for Professor Blinstein, Allah Shalom, the great Chokrim. And she tried to argue, she said, can we compare the Tosafos to the Piskei HaRosh to the Tshuvos HaRosh? And she does it mostly based on Bava Basra. And her conclusion, similar to what we've said, but there'll be a point of difference here, is that the Piskei HaRosh again, the Tosafos HaRosh are pushing more French Torah, German Torah, right? Northern Torah. The Psakim, again, to the people of Spain. The Psakim, again, take up much more Spanish material, but at the end of the day, they're also sort of pushing some of this material. She says the Tshuvos, the Rosh, towards the end of his life, said, and which again would be Matim L'Shitato, let's paskin not looking so much at what the Kadmonim said, not as a way of being, God forbid, ignoring them, but let's not encumber it. Let's sort of have a unplugged Tshuvos. And she has some interesting evidence. The problem is that because she picked areas in the Zikin where, you simply need Chafifa. Where do you have a Tosafos HaRosh? Where do you have a Piskei HaRosh? Where do you have a Tshuvos HaRosh? It's not as easy as it seems. So she picked Bava Basra, other such things. In Dinei Mamanis, that's an area where a posei can be freer. If the Rosh decided Dinei Mamanis, not that he's going to ignore precedent, but Dinei Mamanis, there's not a Kabbalah, I must paskin like by rebbeim in terms of Dinei Mamanis. Dinei Mamanis basically works to a large extent, especially in Spain, on not seichel in the non-Torah sense, but on applying the shittas in a sort of straightforward way. So I'm not sure that I agree with that to go that far with the Tshuvos. I just had an interesting case I'll mention since we're talking before Purim. I'm not sure when this will air, but we're talking not so far before Purim. Very interesting. There's a Tosa Maseches Sukkah Daf Mem Hey, based on a Mishnah there, right? The famous discussion there with Miyad, that when Sukkot, when Hoshana Rabbah comes, Miyad Shomtim Lulavei, Miyad Aktanim, that the way Rashi learns, and Tosa is the first pshat, that the little kids who have a lulav and an esrog, the adults, when the lulav is finished, they grab it, right? They chop the esrogim from the little kids, and they eat it, and they play with it. They make a big simcha. So, and then there's a second perush there. Not that they grab the ketanim. So what's the head? The Tosafos says simcha shel mitzvah. They're not doing it to do rishus. It's because of simcha. It's a shay mitzvah, and there's a kind of a mechila, right? That's expected. That's the way we end. That's the way we go into we end Hoshana Rabbah. We conclude going into Shmini Atzeres. Tosafos there gives a second. It's kind of a mechila. It goes to the the Tshuvos edition quotes a psak of certain Balei that if the Bachrim, the yeshiva Bachrim, would steal food from each other on Purim, don't try this at home. Our Chashulchan is not happy with any of this stuff. We'll see this whole discussion. I don't want to give that shir now. If they steal from each other during the Purim period, the Purim zone, from the night of Erev Purim to the Megillah past the day, through the Purim Suda at night, right? No nezek, you can't take them to Bezdin. Okay, so these are these ideas of mechila mishum simcha. That's the first parish. The second parish that Tosafos mentions is that miyad shomtum, that the ketanim, as soon as they finish with the lulav, the ketanim take their own lulav, and they've been dying to play with the lulav and esrog. The father, I'm making this up. The father's been telling them, don't drop the esrog, don't. Oh, now we can play with football. We can do with the koshelach. We can do whatever we like. Nobody takes anything from anybody. The nafkamina is, according to the first parish, and Tosafos says it explicitly. This means, Tosafos says, from here we learn that at Chasanas, the Bachrim apparently used to get on horses, and they used to, instead of Ketzah Merakdim with their feet, they would joust, they would run horses. Take a look, Sukkah Memei. It's a Meferish Tosafos. It's very strange, very unusual. That was the Yonat Yoma. They would get on horses and they would make, play fights. The Simchas L'smach Esachos and Vesakala. So if somebody's, pants get torn while they're busy jousting, mechila, right? Again, simcha shal mitzvah, you can't collect. Post can discuss, does that work with nezek haguf? There's a bach. It doesn't. In other words, it's kept to a minimum, and it's al pi shivatu ve'ha'ir, mentioned in one place, also in one of these Tshuvos. Anyway, the Rosh, and by the way, the Or Zarua, our old friend, identifies the first Pirush, which is not identified in the printed Tosafos that way, though we could figure it out, as coming from Rash Mishans. So this is a very good heter, right? The Rash Mishans is the one who allowed the Simcha Shal Mitzvah. Good. The Rosh and the Tosafos HaRosh quotes both Terutzim. Again, based on Tosafos Shans, right? So if Rash Mishan said it, he's probably got it. Doesn't really take a position on which opinion is better. Both opinions. In the Piskei HaRosh on the spot, he says, I like the second parish better. He argues for the calmer parish, that it doesn't mean the adults grabbed it away from the kids. I took something that doesn't belong to me. It's somebody else's kid. Not even on no. Simcha shel mitzvah, on Hoshana Rabbah, that's not a matir, right? He says, I like that parish better. But he doesn't really get too carried away. In the Tshuvos HaRosh, the following case is recorded. I think it's in Kuf. The following Tshuva is recorded. There was a chasana, and there too, in Spain, apparently in Spain, also with the horses. So the big there was that after the chuppah, the chasan would ride out of the city, and he'd go into the forest or whatever, go into the open space, and his chaver would ride after him, sometimes on horses, sometimes on pradim. That's not a ferret, that's a mule. Anyway, the Maisa was that the chasan rode on a mule, and somebody caught up to him, and he shmeiced the guy who was running, shmeiced that mule. And he was gorei nezek gadol, especially because the mule belonged to a goy. This was Hertz rent a mule. And this fellow, so now the chasen, right, who pays for this nezek? So do you say, well, according to that Tosafos, it should be, again, the intention was simcha, that's the matir. So, and there's a mechila, right? The Rosh has nothing doing. Pay up. The only thing he did, he's a little bit makil on this, on how you estimate the nezek, perhaps because it was a non-Jewish, whatever the reason was, he was a little bit makil on the other fellow on how much exactly at the pace. I think Me'az Ahubi was a fortune. He was makil a little bit. But so you see the Rosh transitioning. So this is an interesting case. It doesn't often work like this, where you can see his development from work 1 to work 2 to work 3. Not easy to find. It's Purim Torah, but it's very serious Purim Torah. Generally speaking, methodologically, some people think that everything found in the Tosafos HaRosh and Piskei HaRosh are identical. Not so, for reasons that we now know, because the Tosafos HaRosh is the Rosh adding to an existing work, an existing collection. The Piskei HaRosh is more his own Torah. There can be different opinions, and you have to know that. So if somebody comes in and says, I have a kasha, the Tosafos HaRosh to the Piskei HaRosh, you may say, don't spend too much time thinking about that kasha. V'hu adinami, the Tshuvos HaRosh. In fact, now we go the other way. Which wins, Tshuvos HaRosh or Piskei HaRosh? The Achronim take this up. First of all, there's a sibin in the Tur where the Tur says, my father, I think it's in the Membeis and Choshemish, but my father wrote his psakim after this tshuva. He would know. Wait a second. So the Prisha there says, yeah, That's this tshuva. Generally speaking, the tshuvas came later, right? So again, if I have a steer between the tshuvas, which came first, which do I follow? But more than that, a friend of mine recently reminded me there's a wonderful book by someone named Yitzchak Zev Kahana. His originally was Farkash. Moshe Cook put it out many years ago, I think early 70s. Mechkarim b'sifrut hatshuvot. So he raises an interesting question. What's the relationship between Tshuvos and Psakim? Which is more case law, which is more theories of law, and so on. And he dinzachs back and forth. One of the cases that he picks up is the Tshuvos HaRosh versus Piskei HaRosh. And there's not a little Torah in the Achronim to try to figure out what happens. Not that there are hundreds of steers, but there are steers, it would seem, between how the Rosh may have paskined in his Psakim and how he may have paskined in his Tshuvos. That question can be asked. And again, there are the larger questions as a genre. Do Psakim win over Tshuvos? What's the mile of each? What's the tour of each? What's the power of each? And again, but that already is perhaps more nitan to analysis. But in any case, just to have an understanding of how these works all come together. And then we should talk about one work that the Rosh didn't write. You know which one I mean. That's the Berlin, the Besabim Rosh. There's a collection of Tshuvos called the Besabim Rosh, which somebody who was miyuad lazeh later on, echab gefinin more Tshuvos. The problem is that some of the psakim in those Tshuvos are wild. Won't go into all of it now. And it was determined very quickly by the Achronim that these were not authentic. The only problem is, po v'sham, you have Gedolei HaAchronim quoting dinim from the Tshuvos, from the Besamim Rosh, right? There's this guy sweetened it up. You know, he wanted to give some crazy psakim, so he made the Rosh his kapura handle, right? The Rabbi Kiva Eger, if I'm not mistaken, it's in Kuvav Zayin, says that based on the Besamim Rosh, that this would kill the whole bar mitzvah department. That bar mitzvah boy shouldn't have musaf. You have to be 20 years old to be a bal korban. Okay, so the bar mitzvah boy will have to lane, whatever, he'll have to do something else. But that's, laning can be harder for a variety of reasons. And the Rabbi Kiva quotes it. It's from the Besamim Rosh. So again, Rabbi Kiva Eger obviously thought it was legitimate, or he thought the psak was legitimate. I don't know. But this Besamim Rosh caused a lot of problems. People would write excitedly, I found the Rosh, the Besamim Rosh. I tell them, take it back, put it back on the shelf, don't even look at it. But that's a little bit of a problem. And then there are other farms. There's a Rosh al HaTorah, a Pirush Rab Osher al HaTorah that people ascribe to the Rosh. It's a machloket hachokrim. Again, it's hard to know how you will determine, right? Can you compare the Pirushim al HaTorah to what he said? I happen to think at this point, I flip-flop on this. Today, or not today, but this season, I think, whatever period, I think it's not the Rosh. But again, it's somebody named Rab Osher. However, let me give you a terrific Pirush of Rosh, a terrific idea of Rosh on Chumash that he mentions in the Pirush HaRosh to Arvei Psachim, right? He's dealing there with sphere at the end, right? Famous problem in the Torah, Tisperu Chamishim Yom. We don't count 50 days, we count 49 days. The 50th, right? You have the famous Netziv with his uncle, the Tzibur, the rebbeim count 49 with a bracha, the Yachid counts the 50th in his cup. Yeah, you have all kinds of nice Torah. But it's really a problem, Tisperu Chamishim Yom. You have the Rashi, they try. Okay, good, whatever the answer is. Says the Rosh. If you didn't know it was the Rosh, you'd say, what? He says there in Arvei Psachim, the Torah rounds up numbers. If I have a number where it's a 9 number, the Torah rounds it to 10. How do I know that? This Baruch Hamishim Yom. There's another pretty striking example. Arboim Yakenu. 40 Malchus is an Issa Daraisa horrible. Because it's 39. The Torah rounds. And he brings another raya. He says, if you look at all, who would notice this except the Rosh? If you look at all the minyonim, the mispar b'nei Yisrael, right? Kisisa, kamen shkolim, right? You look at all the numbers, all the shvatim, it's either 5s or 10s. They were very organized, the Jewish people. They only gave birth by 5s or by 10s. It's not 27,422. It's always 25, 35, 40, 60, 90. It's never an odd number. It's bankers' numbers. Says the Rosh, Kachidak Shel Torah. Wow. I mean, that I said, if I said that, you'd say, cancel a podcast immediately. But the Rosh really says it because he really means it. It's Chochmas HaTorah. So what else can I tell you, Mr. Podcaster? Mr. Storm Chatter, please.
So where is that Rosh, though? Where can anyone find that Rosh?
The Rosh is in Arvei Psachim. I can give you the exact daf. I'm going to say quick. I just remembered it, so I didn't prepare it properly. But since I have my library at hand, I don't want to embarrass myself, but hopefully I can find it in a minute. It's in Arvei Pesachim. Oh, keep talking, I'll find it.
I'll talk
Ask
for a
me
minute.
the questions.
I'll talk for a minute while you look for it. So also, we have to mention his sons at the end. We'll get to that in a minute. We discussed a little bit about the Torah, and like you said, the Torah
I'll mention
really,
Yehuda, right? I want to mention the sons, correct.
The Torah, like you said, is worthy of another zone. Well, it's worthy, but whatever. It's really a separate podcast.
You could do a tour podcast. It would not be an empty hour. You know what I'm saying? It would be plenty malay v'gadush. By the way, Rabbi Yehuda ben HaRosh, the oldest son, who was the Rosh Hashiva, the tour took over. I'm going to say this jokingly. The tour took over the halacha business. Right? He became the Pesach after the Rosh. Right? His whole life was devoted to his Sefer Pesach and to putting out his father's Pesach in Piskei HaRosh. Again, his Tshuvos possibly, and what do you call it? And so on and so forth. Whereas the tour was devoted to that, the Rabbi Yehuda, who was the oldest son, who didn't live as long as the tour either, unfortunately, the Rabbi Yehuda took over as the Rosh Hashiva in Toledo. That's what the Tzedel HaDerech says. My Rebbe, Rabbi Yehuda, saved the day, and he got it from his father, the Rosh. Right, he got it. He got it from they saved learning Gemara. Oh, I was going to say Daf Kuf Chaf Aleph. It's Daf Kuf Chaf Aleph Amud Beis, Siman Mem in Perek Arvei Pesachim. That's where it is. Right.
Okay.
That's where it is. So that's a pretty unbelievable, right? And he says. Tispru 50 yom lama einanu monem elatishim va'arba yom v'dochkim leforesh ad machras haShabbos, right, the 50th day, and so on and so forth, right? And he's got some other, he quotes other psukim because there are different psukim there. And by the way, another example. Kol hanefesh lebeis Yaakov habo mitzrayim shivim, and if you count up the shivim, all the maforshim from Rashi on out, how do we get 70? The Rosh says it's 69 or maybe even 68. Don't get excited. Right, right, and he says he also says it here about the Mispar B'nai Yisrael. I don't think that's somebody else's addendum, right? So he says they round off numbers, right? So you have a third example. I forgot that one for a moment. Shivim nefesh, right? You don't have to rack your brains out how to get to 70, which the Mefarshim Taka argue about quite a bit. Anyway, so that's the Rosh. That's where it is. So we found we get a
it's Rabbi Yehuda, right? You mentioned he has a Tshuvos. Yehuda, we have his Tshuvos Machon Yerushalayim as a new edition.
I'm sorry. Yes, we do have Tshuvos Rabbi Yehuda ben HaRosh, which are very interesting, and we have a good edition of them. But again, those are not as extensive as his father's Tshuvos. That's a criticism, and they're certainly not extensive as what his brother wrote. The Rosh had 8 sons and 2 daughters, and some of the other sons were also lamdanim, some not. It's not exactly the Rav Papa, but it's that kind of a thing. The Rosh himself had several brothers. In fact, the Torah quotes in one place Chaim, the brother of the Rosh. In other words, they quote the relatives. There are other relatives who were, lamdanim of note and who produced svarim that I could give you as a list, but again, nothing as extensive as the Rosh himself. What did I leave out? I don't even know myself when I left.
Hold on, Rabbi Yehuda, the son, he was killed at Kiddush Hashem?
No, he died. He had a machla. No. He died younger.
Okay, I don't know why I thought that. Yeah, I don't know why I thought that. Okay, fine.
No, because he died. Again, not that the Rosh was such a zakein muflug, but he had and the tour also. But the what do you call it? But the Rabbi Yehuda had a little tougher time apparently in that regard. And of course, the tour also wrote his Pirush on Chumash in 2 parts: the Gematria Pirush, the Masorah, which again. That a lot of things in the tour come from the Maharam, come from Belazar of Worms. That's the Hasidic Ashkenaz side. Come from Yehuda Chassid, right? There's like a straight line. People have shown it. And the other part, the way they printed it, the first part of the parsha, the Gematrias, that's sort of the short tour. And the second part is the Tur HaOruch. That's the Tur HaChumash, also quotes Ramban. Very interesting analysis there too. Different things. Anyway. Yes.
And I'll make mention of that the Torah Bala Turim, there's the excellent Feldheim edition. The Torah Aruch, they also did, but it's totally not around. But Machon Hamar just redid it, a nice edition, added to the stuff back to manuscript as well that people can get a hold of.
I could tell you 2 things very quickly. Readers have their own favorite. 2 things. One Bal HaTurim, which listen. I'm not such a gematria person. I don't mean that badly. You got to learn straight away. Here's something which will prove to everyone that such a thing exists. Here's a pasuk, right? The pasuk by the pasuk by Kohanim. How does the pasuk go? La'aviv ulimo lo yitama. How does that whole pasuk go? The al kol now here. The pasuk is in Parshas Emor. The al. I'm going to read it. I'll say it fast and I'll say it slow. You'll get it. Tell me what's very unusual about this pasuk. The al kol nafshos meis lo yavo by Kohanim. La'aviv by Kohen Gadol. La'aviv ulimo lo yitama. Kohen Gadol can't even be matama for his most precious crow from the parents' nebuch. Right? That's halach. Right? What's very unusual about that pasuk? Plain Hebrew, plain English. But there's something fascinating, unusual. Now I'll say it very slowly. The al kol nafshos meis lo yavo la'aviv ul'imo lo yitamo. I once saw this. I was between aliyahs and I was looking in the Balaturim and I almost fell down on the floor when I saw this. I had to restrain myself. I ran running over to the Rosh. I said, every word, every two words ends with the same letter. The al, kol, lamed, nafshos meis, saf, lo yavo, aleph, la'aviv ulimo, vov, lo yitamo. Sofei tevos min haTorah min ayin. So it means something is going on here. You couldn't make that up if you got a computer. It's Rebbeinu Shalom. So yetzich fashtar. Now, so what does the Torah do with it? These couplets, these doubles. It's a sugya nazir, right? A tough sugya. We know that I have to follow these things very carefully. Mesim, the bones of a mace are not mitzdarfen. There's a shear of tumah, right? So let's say you have a part of a bone from Yid number 1 and another part of a bone from Yid number 2. And together, I put those two shtiklach atzomos together, I'll get a shear. Not mitzdarfen, right? Okay. Mar has a machlokas in nazir. What about dam? Right? Revi is dam. Right? Right? Bone from person A doesn't look like the bones from person B, but the blood from Yid number A and the blood from Yid number B, that could be the zel bazach. Machlokas, whether the dam is mitzvah, if you follow. So the Torah says, from here we have a raya that what? Chatziri is dam mitzdarfen. Because it's twosies. I'll call one from him, one from him. So he uses it to try to solve a very thorny halacha in Shas. That's Tur HaKotzer. And my favorite Tur HaAruch, this is actually, it's more of a Gemara, it's a Masorah thing, but it's in the Tur HaAruch. I call it Torah Tanahalayim, the Shichin Torah. The Tur points out by Moshe Rabeinu, it says, Shal Na'alecha Me'al Raglecha, right? Spelled with a Yud, Na'alecha, plural. And same by Yechiel, when he's told that that word appears 3 places in Tanakh, right? That's the Masoretic parish. That's not what he does in Torah Aruch. In Torah Kotzer, the Maharam does this, Rabbi Yehuda does this, Rabbi Elazar Vurims does it. We have a lot of these things. Somebody has to put them all together. Some of that Feldheim edition does that, by the way. He's pretty good with that, putting them together. So by Moshe Rabbeinu, it's not Alecha. By Yechiel HaNovi, when his wife dies, Nebuch and HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells him, don't take your shoes off. There's a different halacha there. Also, Na'alecha, right? With a Yud. Famously, when in the beginning of the Novi, in the Sefer Yoshua, right? What does the Malach tell you, Yoshua? Shal Na'alcha. Doesn't mean take off one shoe. It's take your shoe. Get rid of shoes, right? The shoe thing. Not Na'alecha. You have to change up. Fine. The Balaturim says as follows. He says as follows. He says, why are Moshe and Yoshua with Na'alecha and why is Yoshua Na'alcha? Simple. Na'alecha means plene, groise shichin. They had big shoes. Yoshua Na'alcha, he had little shoes. That's why it's Na'alcha. Why does that make sense? He says, make good sense. Where was Moshe Rabbeinu going when he was going to see HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the snare, right? He was with the sheep. What do shepherds wear on their feet? I know in all the pictures from Eretz Yisrael, they wear sandalium. No. A shepherd has to wear on his feet what? Galoshes, groise shichin, because if you're going with the sheep, you'll step, God forbid, into something you don't want to step in. Big boots, like cowboys, big boots. Na'alecha, grois. Who's Yechezkel? So Chazal say, based on the difference in how they describe the Merkava, Yeshaya Hanavi was what? A Ben Krach. He was a city boy. He was very sophisticated. Yechezkel was a Ben Kfar. He was a country boy. That's with the description, right? We can explain it in different ways, right? So he gets they're different expressions, right? If you're a Ben Kfar, if you live in the sticks, again, what shoes do you wear? You wear big clodhoppers. That's what you wear. Who's Yoshua? He's a man of the cities. That's why he destroys the Yericho. He's a man of the cities. If you go in the city, when you go to work in the city, you're a fancy guy. What kind of shoes do you wear? Thin Italian jobs, so to speak. Never had such a thing, right? So by Moshe Rabeinu Na'alecha, the shepherd. By Yechezkel Na'alecha, the Ben Kfar, you're out in the boonies, got to have the big boots. By Yoshua, city boy, those thin jobbies with the. I was like, what? That's with whom we are dealing in all of these inyanim. They didn't just know Shas by heart. They had just, again, the Rosh going back to Chamishim, tremendous machshavos, and they didn't worry, well, somebody will think, well, that's unusual. No, that's the pshat. That's what you learn from here.
And there's also so I mentioned the Torah Aruch now. So the Torah Aruch was on by Feldheim, but the same editor, but then it's not around for a while. But now Mahamor did also, they put back.
I have the old Torah Aruch. It's not very. There's no footnotes. They don't tell you anything.
No, it's no footnotes. Missing the Kisvei with the famously almost infamously the one with Yaakov and Leah from the Ksav Yad in the Torah Aruch. For those that know, with Reuben, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda in there. So Mahamor put it back in. It is all back in the new editions. They put it back. So okay, but that's for the Torah. That's for a different time. But he was a Russian son. And he does go to Russia.
Yeah, I think they say the tour may have been around 80 when he died around the time of the Black Death. It could be, but he was around 80, so he lived a longer time. Rabbi Yehuda was, I think, 60. I don't know. He was not. I have to check that, but he was not.
I want to mention one more that I don't know if we know how he's descended, but he claims Shvili Amunah, Me'el Dabi, says that he's a grandson of the Rosh. That's what he says. I don't know if we know exactly how he is. He says that. Okay. He says that he comes from the Rosh. Yeah, this is the Shvili Amunah, which
the Rosh's family, as I mentioned, was a mishpacha miyuches, not just miyucheses. They were lamdonim going up, back to the Ravon. They were lamdonim going down. So it's Torah chazeres lachsanya. No surprise there. Right
now. Okay, so the last thing to ask you is, what about reading? If anyone wants to read about the Rosh, what is it to read?
So again. This Sefer by Avram Chaim Freiman, which is old, again, it was published, I think, in the 70s or 80s, 86. It's simple Hebrew, and a lot of it is lists, but you'll get some nice ideas from that. There have been some nice, Professor Tashma, Olav Hasholem, has very interesting to say about the Rosh in his Sifrut HaParshanit al HaTalmud, where he talks again, he wrestles with this question, Ashkenazi, Shaya B'Sfarad, where is his learning going? And again, he plays with this idea, which I think is a lot correct, that a lot of French, Maram and Rosh are French lamdonim, but they're German poskim. They're Hasidim. So there's a different kind of a shiluf there. And the Rosh, is obviously trying to bring that to Spain. But he has some nice data also on the Svarim, the editions, Tashma. That's certainly good. Unfortunately, much of this is in Hebrew. I'm racking my brains. What can we do this in English? My friend Yuda Galinsky has a nice article in Tarbitz on the Rosh's project to use his Tosafos and his Psukim in Spain, in Toledo, how that worked, and some of the issues with Tosafos Rabbeinu Peretz and so on. That appeared in Tarbitz in the early 2000s. I have to go look for it, but if you would Google it, I'm sure somebody would find it if they want to go through your searches. I can get back to you with that. And those would be my top three choices. Somebody once did a dissertation on Rabbi Yehuda ben HaRosh. They did it at YU many years ago, but they never did anything with it. I read it many years ago. I'm not sure how great it is. That's in English. Someone named Rabbi Dr. Wally Green, lives in Fairlawn. Very nice fellow. Again, it's English, so that's good. What else do we have in English? I've written a little bit about the Rosh in different contexts, but not a whole study on the Rosh himself. We need some more English stuff on the Rosh. You know who wrote about the Rosh? My student, my former student, my former doctorand. I gave him his doctorate. Aryeh Leibowitz has a book called The Late Rishonim or something or other of Ashkenaz. And he has some nice stuff on the, it's brief. It's a brief treatment. He has some nice material, some highlights of the Rosh as well. He may not agree with everything and I said it and vice versa, but it's still pretty good. He talks about the Mefarshim on the Rosh. If I'm not mistaken, he talks about all of the writings briefly, but it's pretty good. I think that's the best I can do for you now. I didn't do enough homework on the readings, but if anything else comes up, I'll tell you when you can put it out for the Heilige Mazinim.
Okay. If anything else comes up, I will add it.
Of course, we're going to get off, and I'm going to figure out what I left out. But I've kept you a long time. You were very helpful, but
okay, exactly.
A long time.
I'm sure there's more, and as always, I'm sure listeners will email me, email you,
right?
And we'll have what to discuss after that. All right, thank you very 100%. Much. And I want to thank again Gluck Plumbing. Again, I should mention the number, Service Division New Jersey, 732-533-1836 extension 1. I want to thank him again. And thank you, Professor Kanarfogel, for joining me once again.
I just can't help but remark, in the spirit of Purim, the Gluck phone number, they don't have to round up to the nearest 10. They can keep it, that ended up with 6, the 3-600, twice high there. They should keep that number right. Is that right? They should keep the number right where it is. Anyway, all right, Zygebench, thank you very much. And we went on to a lot of things, but we maybe could have done 2 on the Rosh. But okay, it's Ach Hashem Stein. Good.
Yeah, and all these podcasts are just, we're just basics, there's a lot.
We're scratching the surface. It's a good surface, but we're scratching, right?
Tip of the iceberg, scratching the surface. Okay, thank you very much.